The chipped teacup sat alone on the counter. No saucer, no steam, just a paper napkin beneath it, like even the cup didn't belong. I had poured it only minutes earlier. Warmth for them. And still, it was left there, untouched. From the next room, I heard her laugh, sharp and light. "She's like a toy," she said. "Only works when we need her." I stood in the hallway, not seen, but hearing everything. My hands didn't tremble. They just rested still. Something inside me had stopped breaking. It had started listening. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. I came to live with them after the fall. One small misstep on the porch stairs, and suddenly I was no longer safe in my own home. The doctor told me I was lucky, just a hairline fracture. But luck doesn't change the way people look at you once they think you're fragile. My daughter, Meredith, insisted I move in. Said it was just until I healed, until I got my strength back. That was over a year ago. Their house is large, modern, all open space and polished wood. Cold, in a way my little bungalow never was. My old home was full of knickknacks and knitted blankets, a garden that had more weeds than flowers by the end, and a porch swing that creaked louder than it swayed. I miss the sound of it, even the weeds. Here, I stay mostly in the guest room at the end of the hall. It's quiet, facing the neighbor's fence, with thin curtains that don't quite keep out the morning light. They offered to decorate it for me, but I said no. I brought my quilt, my Bible, and a photo of my husband, Robert. He passed away 7 years ago, cancer, quick and cruel. He would have known what to say about all this. Or at least, he would have held my hand while I said nothing at all. Meredith was always the practical one. Even as a child, she liked order. Clean lines, neat handwriting, the right answers. I remember her, 6 years old, lining up her crayons by shade. She hated when I messed them up to draw with her. I used to think she'd grow out of it. But now, I wonder if that was always who she was. And I just didn't want to see it. Her husband, Thomas, is polite. Too polite. Like he's always hosting someone he doesn't really want around. He smiles at me, nods, but his eyes slide past like I'm furniture. I try not to be in the way. I wake up early, before they're up, to make coffee and toast. I fold the laundry, I sweep the porch. Little things. Things that used to mean something when someone noticed. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Abigail and Owen. Teenagers now. Abigail is 17, quiet, buried in her phone. Owen is 15 and kind, in that distracted way boys are at that age. They don't speak to me much. I don't blame them. I'm not part of their world, just an old woman with thinning hair and slow steps. Sometimes I wonder what they see when they look at me. Do they see the woman who once sewed dresses late into the night to save money? The one who took in sewing work to help pay for Meredith's piano lessons? Or do they only see this, a body too slow, a voice too quiet, hands that tremble when they try to button small things? Thanksgiving is coming soon. Meredith has been making lists, schedules, who brings what time to eat. She used to call me for recipes. Now she just asks where I keep the good serving platter. I offered to make the sweet potato casserole, the one Robert loved, the one I made every year since 1974. She smiled, tight, polite, and said, "Oh, that's sweet. But we're doing a modern menu this year. So I'll make the tea. Set the table. Watch from the side." I used to think getting older meant being respected. Like time was a crown you wore proudly. But I've learned it's more like being faded, a once-loved photograph, tucked in the back of a drawer. Still there, but only noticed when someone's looking for something else. Meredith isn't cruel. At least, not in the way people imagine cruelty. She doesn't yell, doesn't slam doors. She just forgets I have feelings. Or maybe she remembers, but doesn't find them necessary. There's a rhythm to this house. They speak over me. They make plans without asking. They tell stories I was there for, but retell them like I wasn't. I've become a shadow of their past, not a part of their present. One afternoon, I sat in the living room while they discussed selling my house. They didn't know I could hear them. The door was only half closed. "It's just sitting there," Thomas said. "We could use the money. Fix up the backyard." "She won't go back," Meredith replied. "She's safer here. And she won't argue. She never does." They were right. I never had. That night, I stood by my window, looking out at the neighbor's porch light. I pressed my palm against the glass. Cold. Clear. I wondered if I was really here, or just trapped behind something I couldn't quite see through. I used to write letters. Not to send, just to write. To empty thoughts out of my head before sleep. I stopped years ago. But lately I've started again. Small notes. Lines about the way the light falls through the kitchen window. About the way Abigail chews her nails when she's nervous. About the way my heart feels like a suitcase, carried by everyone, opened by no one. There's a drawer in my nightstand where I keep them. Folded tight. My little pieces of truth. I haven't said anything yet. Not about the house. Not about the things I overhear. Not even about the chipped teacup. But I'm starting to wonder, if silence was once my safety, what is it now? A cage? A mirror? Or just habit? Maybe one day soon I'll find out. The shift came quietly, like a chill you don't notice until you're already cold. At first it was small. Little things. One morning, I reached for the tea tin and saw it had been moved to a higher shelf. Just enough out of reach that I had to take the step stool from the laundry room. No one said anything about it. I didn't ask. I simply struggled up, fetched it, and poured the tea. Later, I saw Meredith reach for her coffee. Her container was now right at eye level. Easy. Convenient. For her. In the evenings, I used to sit in the living room after dinner, knitting quietly while the television played. I didn't mind the noise. I just liked being near them, feeling like part of the world again. Then one evening, I came in and found my chair gone. Replaced by a decorative side table holding an unread book and a candle that smelled of something sharp, cedar and citrus, they said. I stood there, staring at that candle as if it had spoken. I didn't ask where the chair had gone. I knew better. There were other things. My favorite mug, a blue one with a chip in the handle, one Robert gave me on our 25th anniversary, disappeared. When I asked Meredith if she'd seen it, she paused, then said, "It was cracked." I tossed it out. You don't need broken things, Mama. But some broken things still carry warmth. She wouldn't understand. Even Owen, my sweet boy, began pulling away. I'd try to ask about school, his classes, but he'd mumble and shuffle off. Abigail rarely even looked up. Once, I passed her in the hallway and smiled. She brushed past me, headphones in, as if I were a coat rack. Meredith never raised her voice. That would have been easier, maybe. But her dismissals were soft, packaged in smiles. I'd offer to help with something, folding laundry, making dinner, and she'd say, "Oh no, Mama. You just rest. We've got it." Always with that same careful voice, like I was a guest from a long visit who hadn't left. But I didn't feel rested. I felt erased. One evening, they had neighbors over, the Goldmans, I think. Young couple, loud laughter. Meredith told me earlier that day, "We're having people over. Just keep to your room, okay? It's simpler." Simpler. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, in my cardigan and pressed slacks, just listening to the muffled sounds of glasses clinking and laughter rising. I stared at my hands. They've grown thinner, more veined. But they still remember how to braid hair, how to fold shirts just right, how to hold a newborn against my chest. When did that stop being enough? The next morning, the house was a mess, dishes in the sink, crumbs on the counter, glasses with fingerprints clouding the rims. I cleaned slowly, without a word. No one noticed. No one thanked me. And still I did it. Out of habit. Out of hope. But something else was growing alongside that hope. A heaviness. A thought I didn't want to say out loud. I am not a part of this family. I am an accessory. A soft, muted thing that's only useful in the background. I began to notice their whispers. Not loud enough to hear clearly, but just enough to feel. Once, I came around the corner and they went silent. Thomas cleared his throat. Meredith smiled, too quick. "Oh, Mama," she said. "We were just saying how lucky we are to have you here." It felt like a performance. They didn't want me. Not really. They wanted the meals, the folded towels, the soft presents that didn't take up space. The worst moment came a week before Thanksgiving. I was in the laundry room, folding Abigail's sweatshirt, the one with the little embroidered daisies she used to love. I heard her in the kitchen with Meredith. "Does she have to come to dinner?" Abigail asked, her voice a mix of boredom and complaint. "She's so old. She smells like dust." There was a pause. Meredith sighed. "She's just here for now. Like a toy, sweetie. Only works when we need her." They both laughed. That laugh, it didn't echo. It pierced. I didn't cry. I just kept folding. Later that evening, I placed that folded sweatshirt at the foot of Abigail's bed. Neat. Careful. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. But inside, something began to pull away. That night, I didn't eat dinner with them. I told them I wasn't hungry, then sat on my bed, slowly peeling an apple with my paring knife. The slices lay there on the napkin like petals. I ate each one in silence. I've lived long enough to know that silence can be a blessing. but it can also be a wound. And mine was starting to sting. Not because of what they said, but because of what they believed. That I was a toy. And I'd believed it too, quietly over time. But that was changing now. Quietly too. It was Thanksgiving morning when the breaking point came. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but with the clink of silverware and a seat that no longer waited for me. I had woken early before the sun, as I always did. My body no longer needed alarms. Old routines became internal clocks. I moved quietly through the kitchen, setting out ingredients, peeling sweet potatoes, simmering cranberries. My hands knew these motions. They were the same motions that had made holidays feel like love. When Meredith finally came downstairs, her hair tied neatly back, she paused by the island, eyeing the bowls I had prepared. "Oh, Mama," she said, her voice tight but trying to be soft. "I told you, we're not doing the traditional dishes this year. It's all modern, remember? Quinoa stuffing, roasted carrots with honey glaze. That's the menu." I looked at her, then down at the mashed sweet potatoes. I had even added a little orange zest, the way Robert liked. I didn't argue. I simply began to put things away. Later, I watched from the hallway as she arranged the table. The fine dishes, cloth napkins, little name cards in cursive. I used to do that once, carefully choosing who sat beside whom, always leaving room for laughter. I noticed there were only 6 name cards. Abigail, Owen, Thomas, Meredith, the Goldmans again, and Thomas's mother, Ruth. No card for me. I stood there, my hands lightly damp from the cloth I had used to clean the counters. My eyes scanned the table again. I wasn't missing it. I wasn't mistaken. There were 6 cards. 1 short. I waited. Maybe it was in her hand. Maybe she'd forgotten and would catch herself. But she didn't. She adjusted a fork, lit a candle, and walked away humming. Later, as guests began to arrive, I stayed in my room, sitting on the edge of my bed with my hair softly pinned, wearing my pearl earrings, the only real jewelry I had left. I waited, listening to the sounds of footsteps, laughter, the smell of rosemary and wine drifting beneath my door. Not once did anyone come knock. Not once did anyone say, "Mama, where are you?" I had always imagined the pain of being forgotten would come with some dramatic moment. A fight, a cruel word, a slammed door. But no. It arrived quietly, on a holiday I had once made special, in a house filled with voices that no longer held mine. I stood up eventually, smoothed my skirt, and walked to the dining room. They were already seated, plates full, glasses clinking. No one looked up. There was no space. I turned and walked back to my room. Each step felt like closing a book you once loved. Slowly, carefully, but finally. I sat again on the edge of my bed. My notebook was on the nightstand. I opened it and wrote just 2 lines. Today I disappeared. And nobody noticed. That night, after the guests had left and the dishwasher hummed its soft, distant song, Meredith knocked gently and pushed my door open halfway. "You didn't come out," she said, her tone half curious, half rehearsed. "There wasn't a seat," I replied, my voice even steady. She blinked, surprised. "Oh, well, I just assumed you weren't feeling up to it. You should have said something." I nodded. Maybe I should have. She lingered for a moment, then offered a vague smile. "Anyway, it was a lovely dinner. Hope you got some rest." And just like that, the door closed. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Those feelings were too sharp, too loud for what this was. What I felt was deeper. Still, like the hush before a storm that never comes. That night, I lay awake, my eyes tracing the lines of the ceiling in the dark. I thought of Robert, of the year he brought home a broken chair from the churchyard sale and spent hours sanding it down, repairing its legs, oiling the wood until it gleamed. It just needed someone to see the value in it, he had said. I wondered if I was like that chair, only I had been polished too many times, sat on by too many, and finally pushed aside because no one wanted to see how well I had held them. Somewhere around midnight, I got up. I walked barefoot to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, not peaceful. I passed by the dining table, still set from dinner. The cloth napkins were crumpled. A candle had burned all the way down to its stub. I ran my fingers along the edge of the empty seat, the one that could have been mine. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself feel it fully. Not just the loneliness, but the truth beneath it. They didn't forget me. They just didn't think I mattered enough to include. That's when it happened, not a breaking, but a kind of settling. a truth folding itself into place like a final puzzle piece. I had given my life to love, to raising, feeding, holding, forgiving. And now, I was expected to disappear quietly. But maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't. The next morning, the sun came in soft through the curtains, casting a pale golden stripe across my blanket. I lay still for a while, eyes open, not quite thinking, just listening to the quiet. Not the silence of being forgotten. Something different. A quietness inside me, clear and new, like snow untouched by footsteps. I sat up slowly, my joints stiff but no longer heavy. My notebook was on the nightstand. I reached for it and opened to the page from the night before. Today I disappeared, and nobody noticed. I stared at those lines, then turned the page. My pen hovered, but I noticed. And maybe that's enough to begin again. The words surprised me, even as I wrote them. They didn't feel brave, not yet. Just honest. But that small honesty, it stirred something in me. Not anger. Not grief. Just the sense that I had waited long enough for permission that was never coming. I folded my notebook and tucked it into my purse, along with a pen and the envelope that held a copy of my home's deed. The one they didn't know I had. The original sat in a drawer back in the house I once called mine. But this copy, this was proof. That I still owned something. That I still mattered somewhere. After breakfast, a slice of toast left cooling on the table. I asked Meredith if she could drive me to the library. The library? She asked, brows raised. I want to check out a book, I said. And maybe make some copies. She looked unsure, but nodded. I can drop you off on the way to pick up groceries. Perfect. At the library, I sat at a computer, clicking slow but steady, looking up local senior centers, legal aid groups, small apartments near the park. My hands trembled at first, not from fear, but from unfamiliarity. It had been a long time since I did something just for me. The librarian, a young man with kind eyes, helped me scan my notebook pages. I told him they were just letters. Private words, I said with a smile. He didn't ask more. Just nodded, printed them for me, and slipped them into a folder with a paperclip. That folder felt heavy in my hands, not in weight, but in meaning. When Meredith picked me up, she barely asked what I'd done. Find what you were looking for? She said, half distracted by a text on her phone. I did, I replied. That night, back in my room, I laid the papers on the bed. My notebook. The house deed copy. My social security information. A list of questions I wanted to ask a lawyer. I didn't know yet what all of it would lead to. But gathering it, organizing it, felt like building a foundation. A quiet one, but real. The next morning, I dressed in my Sunday blouse. Pressed slacks. Combed my hair twice, just like I used to when Robert and I went to church together. I even applied a bit of rose powder on my cheeks. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. Not strong, not bold, but present. Alive. I walked into the kitchen where Meredith stood with a grocery bag. She looked surprised. You going out? I am, I said, reaching for my coat. Need a ride? No, thank you, I said. I've called a cab. She blinked. Where to? Just an errand. I could tell she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. And I didn't offer. At the lawyer's office, I met with a woman named Ellen. Older than Meredith, younger than me, sharp eyes, soft voice. She listened, really listened, as I explained. I told her I wasn't looking for a battle. Just protection. Clarity. Control of my own affairs. She nodded. We can do that, she said. That night, I sat with my notebook again. This time, I wrote more than just feelings. I wrote plans. Call the senior community near the lake. Ask Ellen about revoking power of attorney. Get my name back on my own bank account. Each item was a thread. Small, maybe. But together, they wove something I hadn't had in a long time. Agency. At dinner, I didn't cook. I sat at the table, quietly, while Meredith reheated leftovers. She didn't ask why I hadn't made anything. Thomas noticed. I saw the flicker in his eye. But no one said a word. Afterward, Abigail left her plate on the table and wandered off. I didn't follow her. I didn't clear it. I sat, sipping lukewarm tea, looking out the window as dusk settled in. The sky turned soft pink, then gray. I imagined what it would be like to have my own table again. Even a small one, with mismatched chairs and an old radio humming quietly in the corner. And I realized something. The life I missed wasn't one of grandeur or praise. It was one of presence, of choosing how I spent my hours, of being seen, not as a tool, but as a woman. They hadn't taken that from me. I had simply stopped asking for it. But now I was starting to. Not loudly, not angrily, but clearly. The days that followed felt different. Not in the way others might notice, but in the way the ground feels steadier when you stop pretending you don't feel the cracks. I began waking up not just early, but with purpose. My little notebook, once only a home for sadness, had become a map. Each morning, I opened it to that list I had started, reading each item out loud in a whisper. My voice was soft, but it carried something new. Conviction. On Tuesday, I called Lakeside Haven, a small senior community tucked behind the Methodist Church off Glenmore Road. The voice on the other end was warm, gentle, and real. "We'd love for you to visit," she said. "Would you like to come by Thursday morning?" I agreed before fear could step in. After the call, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the glass, making little gold patches on the wood. For a moment, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not quite, but maybe its shadow. I didn't tell Meredith. It wasn't secrecy. It was self-preservation. Later that day, I met Ellen again. We sat in her office, the same small room with the humming lamp and the faint scent of lemon polish, and reviewed the steps needed to revoke Meredith's power of attorney. "You have every right," Ellen said gently, her eyes kind but unwavering. "You're competent. Clear. This isn't about confrontation. It's about your autonomy." I nodded, holding the pen tightly as I signed the necessary forms. "I never wanted it to come to this," I murmured. "Most women don't," she replied. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The next morning, I took a walk down Elm Street. There's a small bench near the bakery, just beneath a fading red maple. I sat there with a paper cup of tea from the corner shop. Not the kind I make at home, but something floral, unfamiliar. I liked it. Across the street, a little boy was walking beside his grandmother. She held his hand as he skipped along, telling her something in that animated, breathless way children do. She laughed fully, deeply. The sound surprised me. It had been so long since I'd heard a woman my age laugh like that in public. I closed my eyes, letting the sound drift over me like wind. That same afternoon, I gathered more papers, bank statements, letters, medical documents. I placed them in a small brown accordion file. Each time I clicked the latch shut, it felt like sealing away one more piece of the old fear. That evening, I made soup. Not for them, for me. A simple lentil stew, like I used to make on quiet Sundays when Robert and I would sit on the porch and watch the world not rush by. When Meredith came into the kitchen and smelled it, she paused. "Making dinner?" "For myself," I said calmly. "There's enough if you want some." She blinked, confused. "We already planned takeout." "All right," I said, ladling the soup into a single bowl. She lingered a moment longer, then walked out. I ate slowly, savoring each bite like a memory. The steam warmed my face. The silence didn't feel so sharp anymore. That night, Abigail knocked on my door. "Can I borrow your charger?" she asked, peeking in. "Of course," I said, pointing to the nightstand. She hesitated, her eyes landing on the stack of papers next to my bed. "What's all that?" "Just some things I'm organizing," I replied. She didn't ask more, but before leaving, she said something I hadn't heard in weeks. "Your soup smelled good." After she left, I sat with that sentence like it was a gift. Thursday came. I dressed in a soft blue blouse and ironed slacks. Simple earrings, comfortable shoes. Before I left, I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look young. I didn't look powerful. But I looked like someone who belonged to herself again. Lakeside Haven was tucked among dogwoods and hydrangea bushes. The moment I stepped through the doors, I felt a shift. Not grand, not dramatic, but steady. There were voices here. Slow footsteps. Quiet music playing somewhere in the background. A woman named Janine gave me the tour. She had gentle eyes and called everyone love. She showed me a room with a window facing the garden. Nothing extravagant, but filled with light. There was a small kitchenette, a wide writing desk, and a deep armchair by the window. "It's quiet here," I said, half to myself. She smiled. Quiet, but not lonely. I asked questions. Took notes. I didn't make a decision. Not yet. But when I left, I took with me a brochure and a weight that had begun to lift. Back home, I tucked the brochure into my notebook. That night, I wrote again. Today, I visited a place that didn't see me as an obligation. They saw me as someone beginning again. No one noticed I had been gone most of the day. No one asked. And yet, I wasn't hurt. Because for once, their silence didn't define me. It gave me space. Space I used to reclaim something I'd nearly lost. Myself. That night, long after the house had quieted and the hallway light blinked out, I found myself awake, not restless, not anxious. Just still. I sat up in bed, reached for my notebook, and opened it not to the newest page, but to a blank one. Fresh. Empty. Waiting. My mind drifted, as it often did now, not to the day's tasks or errands but to older things. Farther back. The roots beneath the silence I had lived with for so long. There's a memory I hadn't let myself touch in years. It was my 38th birthday. Robert had forgotten. Again. We had 3 children then, Meredith, only 12, bossy and bright, Daniel, 9, quiet and thoughtful, and Emily, 5, all knees and questions. I had gotten them ready for school that morning, packed lunches, kissed their foreheads, even smiled when Emily's shoe came undone 3 times before the door. Robert had been reading the newspaper at the table, sipping coffee. He grunted when I handed him his thermos. Didn't look up. No happy birthday. No flowers. No note. It wasn't the first time. But something about that morning, the way the sun came through the kitchen window, how it lit the dust in the air, how he didn't see me at all, it made the forgetting feel permanent. That afternoon, while the children were still at school, I baked myself a cake. Yellow with chocolate frosting, the same kind my mother used to make. I even lit a single candle. Stood there in the kitchen, just me, the hum of the fridge, and the soft ticking of the clock. I didn't sing. Didn't wish. I just blew it out. Later that evening, I served the cake after dinner. Told the children we were celebrating my birthday. Meredith blinked, surprised. "Oh," she said, "I didn't know." Robert had the decency to look embarrassed, but he didn't apologize. He cut himself a slice and said, "You didn't remind me." I smiled. "It's all right." But it wasn't. That day stayed with me. Not because of the forgetting, but because of the way I folded myself around it. Made excuses for it. Carried the blame like it was a shawl I had chosen to wear. That was the first time I truly disappeared. Not in body, but in mattering. After that, I stopped expecting things. I stopped celebrating myself. I made everyone else the center, their needs, their birthdays, their milestones. I kept our house clean, our dinners warm, our children clothed in kindness. I gave and called it love. But beneath it all, I had been waiting for someone, anyone, to say, "You matter too." No one ever did. Not then. Not in the years that followed. Robert worked hard. He loved the children in his quiet way. But when it came to me, he was like an old porch light, always there, never warm. I don't think he meant to be cruel. He just never looked close enough to see the slow withering of a woman who needed more than tasks. And I never asked. I had learned too young that asking invited disappointment. My own mother, sharp, practical, used to say, "Don't go fishing for feelings. They'll bite." So I didn't. I learned to be grateful for scraps. A quiet morning. A moment of laughter. A letter in the mail. I kept those things like treasure. But in that silence, I became invisible to the people who should have loved me the most. Years later, when Robert got sick, I cared for him the way I had cared for everything else, fully, without complaint. I held his hand in the hospital room. Read to him from Psalms. Sang him to sleep when the morphine made his dreams too loud. He died holding my hand. And still, part of me wondered if he ever truly saw me. That question, unanswered, followed me like a shadow. And now, sitting here, older than I ever imagined being, I realized something that I had never said aloud, not even to myself. I had made peace with being forgotten, a long time ago. And that was the deeper wound. Not the birthdays missed, the words unsaid, the seat left empty on Thanksgiving. It was that I believed I didn't deserve more. That I had convinced myself being small was holy. That being silent was grace. That being needed was enough, even if I was never cherished. But now, in this strange, quiet chapter of life, I was beginning to see that grace wasn't in disappearing. It was in being, in choosing, in gently, firmly saying, "I am still here." I closed the notebook, held it in my lap. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. A rustle, a whisper. Inside me, a space opened, not wide, but wide enough. Not for anger, not for regret, but for understanding. And maybe, just maybe, for forgiveness. Not of them, but of myself. For waiting so long to return to me. It was a Tuesday when I found it. I hadn't been looking, not truly. I was in the hallway closet, searching for the old sewing kit. The hem of one of my slacks had come loose, and I didn't want to ask Meredith. Not when I still remembered how she had looked at my blouse last week, with a mixture of pity and irritation, and said, You should really let me take you shopping. But as I reached behind a stack of unused board games and holiday decorations, I saw a folder, thick dark blue, tucked neatly between a rolled-up yoga mat and an unused photo album. I don't know what made me open it. Maybe instinct. Maybe something quieter. Inside were documents, crisp, recent, with the seal of the state printed on the corners. I scanned them slowly, my eyes adjusting to the sterile language of legality. And then I saw it. Durable power of attorney, full authorization, medical and financial. My name, Meredith's signature. A date. Not old, just 4 months ago. I blinked. I kept reading. There, in neat printed lines, it stated that I was no longer fit to manage my affairs. That my memory had noticeably declined. That I required assistance with basic decision-making. It was signed by a doctor I didn't know. A name unfamiliar. A form filled without my presence. Without my knowledge. I sat back on the floor of the hallway. The documents slid into my lap. The house was quiet, as always. Dishes softly clinking in the dishwasher, a muffled laugh from Abigail's room, the rustle of leaves outside. Normal sounds. Ordinary life. But inside me, something collapsed. Not loudly. Like a house settling after years of standing strong. One slow crack through the foundation. They had taken my voice. On paper, I had become less than myself. It wasn't just about control of money or medicine. It was about the belief behind it, that I was no longer capable. No longer competent. That decisions about me could be made without me. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even told me. I looked again at Meredith's signature. Precise. Confident. My daughter, who once clung to my legs during thunderstorms. My daughter, who sobbed in my arms when her first friend moved away. The same hands that reached for mine as a child now reached over my life, quietly, firmly, without consent. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. Then I stood slowly, like someone learning to walk again. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I served myself coffee, sat by the window, wrote in my notebook with hands that didn't shake, though everything inside me trembled. They took my name, folded it into papers without my knowing, and still expected me to smile when spoken to. I wasn't angry. Not the way people think of anger. I didn't want to scream, to throw things. What I felt was older, heavier. The kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from clarity. From realizing how far someone will go to believe you're no longer needed. I thought back to my visit with Ellen, the lawyer, just days earlier. I had revoked that very power. Not out of suspicion, just out of instinct. Now I knew why that instinct had come. Meredith didn't look at me and see her mother anymore. She saw a task, a burden, a file to be managed. I remembered her words to Abigail. She's like a toy. She only works when we need her. Now I saw the full picture. They didn't just dismiss me from the table. They had begun erasing me. With kindness. With quietness. With paperwork. Later that day, I called Ellen again. I found the document, I said, my voice low. You're protected, she replied. The revocation stands. Still, I felt it like a bruise. Legalities could be reversed. But the betrayal, the belief behind it, stayed. That evening, I didn't join them for dinner. I said I was tired. Meredith offered no resistance. Thomas shrugged. Abigail didn't notice. I sat in my room with a slice of bread and butter. A cup of tea. My notebook open. And I wrote, I am still here. I still know who I am. They may have tried to rewrite me, but I hold the pen. That night, I dreamed of my old home. Not the rooms or the porch or the humming refrigerator. I dreamed of my name, stitched into towels, written in cursive inside old books, whispered by Robert when he thought I was asleep. It was a good name. It still is. And no paper, no signature, no assumption could take that away. I woke the next morning not with dread, but with direction. Something had settled inside me. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. A kind of silent declaration that needed no witness. I didn't tell them what I knew. I didn't wave the document in anyone's face. That wasn't how I moved. That's not who I was. Instead, I began shifting my life like an old piece of furniture, quietly, inch by inch, until it stood in a different place. It started with the chair, the one they had moved from the living room. I found it in the garage beneath a pile of boxes and an old exercise bike that no one used. I wiped it down, polished the arms, and carried it, slowly, breathlessly, to the small sunroom at the back of the house. I placed it by the window, angled just so. That evening, I sat there with a book. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask permission. I just sat, and no one stopped me. The next day, I began making my own meals. Simple things: oatmeal in the morning, grilled cheese for lunch, vegetable stew at night. I left the main kitchen to them and carved out a corner in the pantry where I kept my own tea, a small cutting board, my blue mug. Not the chipped one they threw out, but a new one I bought from the thrift store for $1.50. It wasn't about the food. It was about the choosing. I started walking again, just up the block and back. Sometimes further. I passed the neighbor with the yappy dog, the girl who skated up and down the sidewalk, the old man who always watered his lawn twice. I nodded. Sometimes they nodded back. It felt like being part of the world again, even just a little. Meredith noticed. She'd look up from her laptop and blink when I came in from a walk, cheeks flushed, scarf loosened. "Where'd you go?" "Just around," I'd answer. She never pressed. But the shift unsettled her, I could tell. She liked me still. Predictable. Folding things. Heating things. Waiting. I was no longer waiting. One afternoon, I returned from the library with a stack of novels. As I passed through the kitchen, Abigail looked up from her phone. "Are you reading all those?" I nodded. "Cool," she said. It was a single word, but it felt like a small door creaking open. In my room, I pinned a note above my dresser. I am allowed to be more than useful. I am allowed to be whole. I stopped reminding them about things: appointments, groceries, laundry. If Meredith forgot to pay the electric bill and panicked 2 days later, I didn't rush to calm her. I was no longer the cushion for their chaos. And strangely, the house didn't fall apart. It just got quieter. One morning, Thomas asked, "Did you do the sheets?" I looked up from my crossword. "No," I said simply. "Not this time." He paused, then shrugged. Walked away. Just like that. No fight. No guilt. It stunned me, how easily the burden fell when I refused to keep holding it. Later, I opened my notebook and wrote. Sometimes the chains are paper. They sound like expectations. They tear the moment you stop agreeing. There were still moments that ached. Like when I passed the hallway where they had hidden that folder. Or when I saw Abigail laughing with Meredith in the kitchen and remembered the way they used to laugh with me. But those aches no longer defined me. They were part of the past I carried, not the present I chose. One evening, I took the bus, alone, to a little diner near Lakeside Haven. They served meatloaf and pie and didn't rush you if you read between bites. The waitress was young, kind, didn't call me sweetie, just ma'am, and refilled my tea without asking. I stayed for an hour, writing in my notebook, watching the window, listening to the low murmur of conversation around me. When I left, I felt light. Not because the world had changed, but because I had stopped asking it to. I had changed. I was no longer the toy they summoned when something needed doing. I was no longer the silence in the room. I was someone making choices again. Quietly. Fully. Without apology. That night, as I lay in bed, I traced the curve of the new mug in my hands. Smooth. Whole. A small thing. But mine. It was a Thursday evening when the knock came, soft, tentative, just 3 gentle taps against my bedroom door. I looked up from my notebook, pen resting between 2 unfinished sentences. Outside, the hallway light painted a pale stripe across the floor. Quiet footsteps. Then her voice. "Grandma, are you awake?" It was Abigail. I called out softly, "Come in." She opened the door halfway, eyes down, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to enter. In that moment, she didn't look like a teenager glued to a screen or lost in some distant world of apps and attitude. She looked small. Still. Almost like the child I remembered. The one who once climbed into my lap during thunderstorms and asked if clouds could cry. I just needed a quiet place for a minute," she said. I nodded, gesturing toward the chair near the window. "It's all yours." She stepped in, closed the door gently behind her, and sat down. We didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. After a few minutes, she looked over at the notebook in my lap. "You write a lot." "I do," I said, smiling gently. "It helps me make sense of things." She looked away, then back again. "I read some of what Mom said. That paper about the power of attorney. I saw it in the closet once. I wasn't supposed to, but..." Her voice faded. I didn't interrupt. I let her find the words in her own time. "I just thought it wasn't right." "You're not," she paused, then whispered. "You're not what they say." I felt something stir in me, not vindication. Something gentler. Like sunlight through closed curtains. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." Abigail tucked her legs beneath her, curled like a cat. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how to be in this house, she murmured. Everything's so organized. Controlled. I nodded. Yes. It can be hard to breathe in spaces like that. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw my granddaughter's heart instead of her distance. Did you ever feel invisible here? All the time, I said, with no bitterness. Just truth. She leaned her head back against the chair. I think I'm starting to understand why you've been different lately. I'm remembering how to choose myself, I said softly. It's not easy, not at this age. But I'm trying. She was quiet again, and then, so quietly I almost missed it, she whispered, I'm glad. That one word, glad, settled into me like a small flame. Not a bonfire, just a steady warmth. After that night, Abigail started coming to my room more often. Not every day, but often enough. Sometimes she brought her sketchbook. Sometimes she brought cookies. Once, she just came and sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly to herself while I wrote. We didn't need to speak much. It was the being that mattered. She asked once if she could read my notebook. Not all of it, just a page. I hesitated, then turned to a section I thought she might understand. It was the entry from the night I visited the senior community. I passed it to her, held my breath as she read. When she finished, she looked up at me. That place, it sounds like somewhere you could be happy. I think it might be, I said. Will you go? I'm not sure, but for the first time, I'm letting myself want it. She nodded. You should want things. You deserve to. A pause, then she added. If you go, can I still come visit? My throat tightened. I reached over, took her hand in mine. Always. That weekend, she helped me organize the stack of documents I had gathered, sorting, labeling, folding neatly into a binder. She even used color tabs. Don't tell Mom, she joked. She'll think I'm turning into her. We laughed. It was the first time we had laughed together in what felt like years. Through her, I began to remember that strength doesn't always come in loud moments. Sometimes it comes in quiet allies, those who sit beside you in your small room and offer the kind of company that doesn't ask for anything in return. Abigail didn't fix things for me. She didn't need to. Her presence reminded me that I hadn't failed completely, that even if others overlooked me, one heart had stayed open. And through her eyes, I saw a version of myself I had almost forgotten. Someone still worthy of companionship, of listening, of being believed. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, sometimes your rescuer is not a knight. Not a plan. Not a paper. Sometimes it's a child who chooses to sit with you, while the world keeps rushing past. It started with small things, the kind that shift just slightly out of place before anyone realizes the whole picture has begun to change. Meredith was in the kitchen when she noticed it first. She pulled open the cabinet where I used to keep the large serving bowls, the ones I washed, dried, and stacked every Wednesday without fail. But they weren't where she expected, because I hadn't touched them. Mama, she called out, her voice rising just slightly. Where's the red ceramic bowl? I haven't used it, I said, from my chair in the sunroom. She paused. I could hear it, that tiny stutter in her breath. Confusion meeting resistance. It kept happening. The laundry began to pile up, no longer folded neatly before she even asked. The tea wasn't brewed by morning. The floor wasn't swept after dinner. The little invisible tasks that once happened without thanks, they simply stopped. I hadn't made an announcement. I hadn't explained. I had just stopped. And in the silence of that decision, their dependence began to echo louder than any words I could have spoken. Thomas came to the table one evening with a wrinkled shirt. Did something happen to the iron? He asked. No, I replied calmly, lifting my teacup. But it's there if you need it. He stared at me, blinking. Then nodded, walked away. Not another word. Meredith, though, was slower to understand. At first, she tried to work around it, leaving subtle reminders, gentle hints. A post-it note on the counter. Please slice carrots for the roast. A grocery list with a smiley face beside Grandma's touch smiley face. I ignored them all. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed to earn my place through small labors. That was the shift she couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I returned from my walk to find her waiting for me in the kitchen, arms folded across her chest. We need to talk, she said. I nodded, sat down. I've noticed you've changed. I have. She seemed caught off guard by the simplicity of my answer. Is something wrong? No, I said. Something is right. She blinked. I continued. For a long time, I thought helping quietly was love. I thought disappearing into usefulness made me needed. But I see now that being needed isn't the same as being respected. She didn't respond right away. Her face tightened, not with anger, but something closer to discomfort. "You've always helped," she said. "I never asked for that to change." "I know," I said gently. "That's why I had to change it myself." There was a pause, the kind that stretches between two people standing on opposite shores. "I'm sorry if you felt unappreciated," she offered carefully. "I have," I said. "But I don't anymore. Because I've stopped waiting for your appreciation to feel whole." That was the moment it shifted in her. I saw it. The realization that the quiet woman who folded her towels, kept her secrets, and took up little space had not disappeared but transformed. And there was nothing she could do about it. Later that week, I overheard her on the phone with Thomas while I sipped tea in the sunroom. I don't know what's gotten into her. She's so distant. She barely speaks unless spoken to. And Abigail, she's always with her now. She barely talks to me anymore. Thomas said something I couldn't hear. Meredith's voice dropped lower. "I just feel like I've lost control of the house." Control. There it was. That word. The truth behind all the paper, the planning, the careful boundaries drawn without my name. It was never just about safety. Or care. Or love. It was about keeping me manageable. Predictable. Contained. But now, the seams had loosened. The threads were pulling. And she couldn't quite stitch it back together. One evening, I found her in my sunroom, standing beside my chair, holding my notebook. She hadn't opened it. But she was holding it. "I was looking for the scissors," she said. "They're in the drawer," I replied. She hesitated, still holding the notebook. I waited. "I didn't read it," she said, quieter now. "I know." She put it down gently, almost reverently, like it was something sacred. I could see it in her, the beginning of understanding. The awareness that I had built something she didn't know how to reach. A life apart from hers. And not one she controlled. Abigail, meanwhile, continued to visit. She brought me a scarf she had knitted, pale blue with flecks of silver. "It's not perfect," she said. "It's beautiful," I replied. We sat together, watching the light move across the window pane. "You know," she said softly, "Mom is confused by you. She's not the only one." We smiled. But it was true. Meredith didn't understand this version of me. The one who chose solitude over service, presence over approval. And that confusion grew with each passing day. Because I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I just lived differently. And sometimes the quietest rebellion is simply living in truth when others depend on your silence. The confrontation came on a Wednesday morning, if you could call it that. There were no slammed doors, no angry words, just the sound of ceramic clinking against ceramic as I poured tea for myself in the kitchen. I had set the table for one. Meredith walked in, still in her slippers, her robe tied tightly around her waist like armor. She paused when she saw me, calm, composed, seated with a steaming cup and a folded paper beside my plate. I think she expected me to stand, to move, to ask what she needed. I didn't. She cleared her throat. "Abigail said you're thinking of leaving." I looked up. "I am." She blinked. "Why?" There it was. That word, so small, so insufficient to hold the weight of everything it failed to ask. I took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup down gently. "Because I am not a fixture," I said softly. "Not a background hum. Not a forgotten chair in the corner. I am a woman who has lived a full life, and I deserve to finish it with dignity." Meredith's face twisted, not with cruelty, but with disbelief. "But you're cared for here. You have everything you need." I smiled, not bitter, not angry. Just tired. "Do I?" She stepped closer. "You have your own room. You don't pay rent. We make sure you're safe." "Safe," I repeated, turning the word over like a stone. "But not seen. Not valued. I've become something convenient, like a coat hooked by the door. Always expected to hold weight, never invited to the table." Her mouth opened, then closed again. I reached for the paper beside me. The letter Ellen helped me write. A formal revocation of the power of attorney. My copy. Her name no longer held sway over my choices. I slid it across the table to her. "What is this?" "It's what I should have done the moment I realized I was no longer a mother in your eyes, but a problem to manage." She flinched. It wasn't a cruel statement. It was a mirror. And sometimes mirrors are harsh. "Why didn't you talk to me?" she asked. "I did," I said. "In small ways. In empty chairs and cold tea and silences that should have been noticed. But you didn't listen." She looked down, her hand brushing over the letter without taking it. I stood, steadying myself on the table's edge. "I'm moving to Lakeside Haven," I said. "I've chosen a small room with a window that faces the garden. I'll cook for myself. Walk in the mornings. Maybe join a book club." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. "I don't hate you," I added gently. "But I won't let your discomfort dictate the rest of my life." The air between us thickened. Not with anger, with reckoning. She was not a villain, but she had grown used to a version of me that no longer existed. And I was no longer willing to apologize for leaving her behind. As I turned to leave the kitchen, her voice caught me. "Does Abigail know?" "She does," I said. "She helped me pack." I heard the breath she didn't take. "She'll still visit," I added. "If she wants to." I didn't wait for more. I walked down the hallway, past the family photos that no longer felt like mine, past the guest room that had never quite belonged to me. I entered my room, where my small suitcase sat zipped and waiting. I picked up my coat, my notebook, and my new blue mug, the one that symbolized everything I had reclaimed. When I stepped outside, the morning was crisp. The air smelled like new beginnings. The cab pulled up quietly. I placed my bag in the trunk myself. Before I got in, I looked back at the house. Not in longing. In farewell. It was the final turning of a page. Not a dramatic end. Just the quiet resolution of someone who had, at last, remembered her own worth. As the cab pulled away, I whispered one line into the breeze. "I am not a toy. I am a woman who chose to live." My new room was smaller than the one I had left behind, but somehow, it felt like it held more space. The window overlooked a modest garden. Nothing elaborate, just a few benches, a fountain shaped like a swan, and 2 dogwoods that bowed gently in the wind. There was a walking path that circled through the grass and disappeared behind the east wing. I liked that it disappeared. It meant there was somewhere to go. Unpacking didn't take long. I had brought only what mattered. A few clothes, my notebook, the binder Abigail had helped me organize, and the photo of Robert I had once kept on my old dresser. I placed him on the little shelf by the bed. "You'd like it here," I said aloud, smoothing the quilt. The first few days passed in a kind of gentle quiet. No one rushed me. No one asked for favors, for dinner, for laundry. I was invited to things, a watercolor class, a reading group, a Sunday service, but no one minded when I said, "Maybe next time." For the first time in years, my time was mine. On the 3rd morning, I woke with the sun and walked the path behind the east wing. I passed 2 women in wide-brimmed hats talking about tomato seeds. One of them smiled at me and said, "Good morning, love." I smiled back and meant it. At breakfast, I sat near the window and sipped my tea, a new flavor the dining room offered, cinnamon apple. It reminded me of fall days and warm kitchens. An older gentleman named Henry sat 2 tables over and nodded when he caught my eye. The next day, he brought a newspaper and asked if I wanted the crossword. I said yes. We did it together, quietly, between spoonfuls of oatmeal and the sound of birds outside. It was not a dramatic life. It was a gentle one. But it was mine. Abigail called every Sunday. At first, just quick check-ins. Then longer talks. "I miss you," she said once. "The house feels quieter without you." "Quiet can be good," I replied. "But lonely isn't." She paused, then said, "Mom's trying. She's different lately." "I hope she finds her peace," I said, because I wasn't holding bitterness. I had left it behind with the unused towels and the chipped teacup. A few weeks after I moved in, a staff member asked if I'd like to lead a small writing circle. "Just a few ladies who like to scribble," she said with a grin. I agreed. We meet every Wednesday in the garden room, by the tall windows and potted ferns. We read poems. We write small memories. We laugh more than we cry, though both are welcome. I shared one of my notebook pages once, the one I wrote after finding the chair in the garage. The others sat quiet for a moment. Then one woman whispered, "That's how I felt too." And I realized something. My story wasn't only mine. It belonged to many of us. Women who had bent for others until they were mistaken for the floor. But here, in this place of slower days and honest reflections, we stood again. Not tall, not loud, but firm. One day, Meredith came to visit. She brought a bouquet, soft pink peonies, my favorite. She looked around the room, her eyes pausing on the notebook, the photo of Robert, the scarf Abigail had draped over the back of my chair. "It suits you," she said. "It does." We sat for a while. Not awkward. Not entirely easy. But willing. She didn't apologize in words. But before she left, She took my hand and squeezed it gently. That was enough. Some apologies are spoken in actions, not sentences. As spring folded into summer, I planted a few herbs in a pot outside my window: rosemary, thyme, lavender. When the wind blew, the scent drifted in and reminded me, I am still growing. I write every day now. Not out of sorrow, out of clarity. And one morning I wrote this: You are not selfish for wanting peace. You are not cruel for choosing distance. You are not broken for walking away from hands that only reached for you when they were empty. I folded that page and tucked it inside the front of my notebook. Maybe I'll read it aloud at our next circle. Maybe not. But I know the words now. And more importantly, I believe them. I sit by the window now most evenings, a cup of tea warming my hands, the scent of lavender drifting up from the pot just outside. The light changes gently across the floor, soft gold turning to silver gray. It's a quiet hour this time of day, the kind I used to give away so easily. But not anymore. Now I keep this time for myself. Sometimes I still think about that chipped teacup, the one left on the napkin like a message. Sometimes I remember the words, she's like a toy. Only works when we need her. And sometimes, yes, I feel the old sting. But more often now, I remember what came after. The notebook. The walks. The laughter with Abigail. The taste of freedom, not grand but firm. I once believed dignity had to be earned, proven through usefulness and silence. But I know better now. Dignity is not a reward. It's a right. And love, real love, does not hide in control or paperwork or polite dismissals. Real love notices. Real love includes. Real love listens, even to the quietest voices in the room. If you're still reading this or listening, I want you to hear me, truly hear me. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not only what others need from you. You are still you. And that is enough. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. You belong. You matter. You can choose yourself even now. Especially now. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, share your story in the comments. Someone else might find their strength in your words.